What if a scientific mystery was solved, only to reveal a terrifying truth? A scientist, exiled for her theories, discovers that the strange red rain isn't just responding to a signal, it's building a receiver, an antenna. As her arrogant mentor arrives to shut her down for good, a global alert sounds. The rain is falling everywhere. Was her discovery a warning? Or did her investigation trigger the final event? What happens when the proof you were searching for dooms everyone? The only sound in the cavernous lecture hall was the echo of a single voice. Dr. Elara Vance stood at the lectern, a lone figure dwarfed by the tiered rows of empty seats rising into the shadows. Behind her, a colossal screen cast a soft blue glow, illuminating the title of a presentation no one would ever see. Unclassified biological entities, the Kerala protoplasms. Her own voice, sharp and precise, cut through the silence. The official report, published in 2006, concluded that the phenomenon was the result of airborne spores from a terrestrial, lichen-forming alga of the Trentipolia genus. She paused, her eyes scanning the vacant seats as if they were filled with hostile academics. A neat, tidy, and demonstrably incomplete conclusion. She clicked a remote, and the screen changed to show two micrographs side by side. One, labeled Trentipolia, was a cluster of greenish, vaguely spherical cells. The other, labeled Kerala sample, showed a collection of deep crimson vesicles, their cell walls unnervingly thick, their internal structure empty. What the official report fails to adequately address, she continued, her voice gaining intensity, is the complete absence of DNA. No nucleus, no genetic material of any kind. Furthermore, the cellular walls exhibit a startling resilience to extreme temperatures, surviving cryo-freezing at -150 Celsius and sustained heat of over 300 degrees. This is not algae. This is something else. She braced herself, her knuckles white on the lectern, imagining the first hand shooting up in the back row. A skeptical, tenured professor, his face a mask of condescending pity. Dr. Vance, are you suggesting an extraterrestrial origin? Because that's the kind of career-ending speculation this sounds like. Her eyes narrowed. I'm not suggesting anything, she said to the empty chair. I am pointing to a set of empirical data that the accepted model cannot explain. The goal of science is not to reinforce what we already believe, but to rigorously investigate what we do not understand. The Kerala event is a file that was closed, not a case that was solved. The evidence is there. We simply have to be willing to look. Her final words dissipated into the vast, silent space. For a long moment, she stood there, a brilliant scientist making a flawless argument to an audience of ghosts. Later, in her office, the silence was replaced by a cluttered chaos that felt more like home. Books on extremophiles and atmospheric science were stacked in precarious towers on every surface. Meteorological charts from the 2001 monsoon season in southwestern India were pinned to a corkboard, covered in a spiderweb of handwritten notes. It was an island of obsessive inquiry in the sterile beige ocean of the university's science wing. She sat at her desk, staring at a face on her monitor. It was an archived video call from 6 months ago, a face she once trusted implicitly. Professor Julian Croft, her former mentor, looked out from the screen, his expression a carefully crafted mask of paternal concern. Elara, his voice, smooth and authoritative, filled the small office. I've seen your preliminary proposal. I'm advising you, as a friend, to let this go. In the video, he leaned forward, his image pixelating slightly. The red rain of Kerala is a solved mystery. A classic case of media sensationalism amplifying a rather mundane biological event. It was Trentipolia algae. We have the spectrometry, we have the microscopy. The case is closed. The DNA, she whispered to the screen. There's no DNA, Julian. As if hearing her, the recorded version of Croft gave a patient, weary sigh. The samples were degraded. The collection protocols at the time were enthusiastic, but not rigorous. Listen to me. You are one of the brightest microbiologists I have ever taught. Don't throw away a brilliant career chasing shadows in a petri dish. There is no mystery here. Abandon this fixation. It is a professional dead end." She stared into his digital eyes, the sting of his dismissal as fresh as it was that day. He hadn't debated her data. He had simply erased it, declaring it irrelevant. She moved the mouse, and with a sharp click, his face vanished, leaving her in the quiet glow of her monitor. A dead end. Maybe he was right. That night, the doorbell chimed through her small apartment, a sharp, intrusive sound. A courier stood on her doorstep, holding a small, heavily insulated crate. He handed over a tablet to sign, his expression bored and incurious. Inside, nested in dense foam, was a single object, a metal thermos, frosted with a layer of condensation that was already beginning to melt. It felt impossibly cold in her hands. Beneath it was a letter, the envelope made of thick, creamy paper, the address written in an elegant, spidery script. She slid a finger under the seal and unfolded the single sheet of paper inside. "Dr. Vance," the letter began. "Forgive the unsolicited correspondence. My name is Dr. Samir Joshi. I was a junior member of the Center for Earth Science Studies team that first investigated the red rainfall in 2001. I have followed your published papers for years, and I recognize in you a spirit of inquiry that has long since been punished out of me. The official explanation is a lie. It is a comfortable fiction designed to close a file that frightened many powerful people. We saw things in the early samples, behaviors and properties that were scrubbed from the final report. We were told our instruments were malfunctioning, that our observations were contaminated. We were encouraged to take early retirement. I have kept one sample, preserved under ideal conditions from the first day of the rainfall. It is the last of its kind, I suspect. I am too old and too discredited to do anything with it, but it is a crime against science for it to remain hidden. Professor Croft and the others, they look for life as they know it. They will never find the truth because they are incapable of seeing it. I am sending this to you because you seem to be the only one asking the right questions. Test it, Doctor. But do not limit yourself to the tools you know. Test it with an open mind and an eye for the energies they ignore. Yours in science, Samir Joshi. Elara stood in the middle of her living room, the letter trembling slightly in one hand, the cold, heavy thermos in the other. A professional dead end, Croft had called it. But in her hands, she held a key. A key to a door the rest of the world insisted did not exist. The cold from the metal seeped into her skin, a chilling promise of the unknown. Her fixation wasn't over. It was just beginning. The pristine, sterile air of the university's Level 3 microbiology lab was a world away from the cluttered chaos of Elara's office. Here, everything had its place. Autoclaves hummed with quiet efficiency, and the air carried the clean, sharp scent of antiseptic. It was a temple to the scientific method, and Elara felt a renewed sense of purpose as she handed the chilled thermos to her lab technician, Ben Carter. Ben was everything Elara was not: grounded, pragmatic, and deeply skeptical of anything that couldn't be quantified in a spreadsheet. But he was loyal, and he was the best tech in the department. He handled the thermos with a surgeon's care, his movements economical and precise. "So this is it," he said, his voice flat. "The magic bullet from India. Just run the standard analysis, Ben. Let's see what we've got." He nodded, extracting a single, viscous, blood-red drop with a pipette and placing it on a slide. He slotted it into the digital microscope, and the main screen flickered to life, showing a magnified view of the contents. The cells were just as Elara remembered from the old research papers: simple, uniform, crimson sacs floating in a clear medium. They were utterly inert. "Okay," Ben said, typing commands into a terminal. "Running a polymerase chain reaction for DNA amplification." He leaned back in his chair, tapping his fingers on the console. "Don't hold your breath." The process was quick. A progress bar filled, a program ran, and then a single stark result appeared on the screen in bold, black letters. "Negative." Ben swiveled in his chair. No DNA, no RNA, nothing. Just like the 2006 report, just like Professor Croft said. He shrugged, a gesture of finality. Without a genome, there's no replication, no protein synthesis, no life. They're just weird, tough little protein sacs that happen to fall out of the sky. Elara stared at the screen, a familiar knot of frustration tightening in her stomach. The data was the data. Cold, hard, and unforgiving. Croft was right. Joshi was a sentimental old man, and she was a fool chasing a ghost. Hours bled into one another. The initial disappointment had cooled into a stubborn, simmering frustration. While Ben ran spectrometry and chemical composition tests, all of which confirmed the cells were organic but fundamentally inert, Elara sat at a side table, poring over the papers that had come with the thermos. They were photocopies of Dr. Joshi's original, handwritten lab notes from 2001, filled with diagrams, equations, and observations that had never made it into the official report. Most of it was data she'd already theorized about. Extreme temperature resilience, unusual cell wall density. But one page was different. It was less a lab report and more a frantic journal entry. He described a series of bizarre equipment malfunctions that occurred only during the heaviest periods of the red rainfall. Magnetometers would spin wildly, and radio telescopes in the area reported powerful, unidentifiable signal spikes. A line, twice underlined, jumped out at her. It is as if the rain itself is electrically charged or responding to something in the air, a frequency we cannot isolate. The energies they ignore, Elara whispered to herself. She stood up, her voice cutting through the quiet hum of the lab. Ben, I have an idea. It's a long shot. She carried a Petri dish containing a fresh sample over to the lab's EM-shielded chamber, a lead-lined box designed to isolate experiments from all outside electromagnetic radiation. Ben watched her, his expression a mixture of concern and pity. Elara, what are we doing? This is a wild goose chase. We've proven what's in the sample. It's inert. Joshi's notes mentioned anomalous radio frequency spikes during the rainfall, she said, carefully placing the dish inside the chamber and sealing the heavy door. She connected the chamber to a series of energy emitters. He thought the cells were reacting to something. He also thought he was being sidelined by a grand conspiracy, Ben countered gently. Look, I want you to be right, but chasing radio ghosts? That's how you end up on the academic blacklist. Then let's be methodical ghosts, she replied, her eyes fixed on the monitor that showed the chamber's interior. She initiated the first test, starting with UV light. Nothing. The cells remained perfectly still. She moved on, microwaves, X-rays, gamma radiation. Each time, the result was the same. The cells floated, dormant and unresponsive. Ben leaned against the wall, arms crossed, his silence a heavy weight in the room. He was right. This was desperation. This was the end of the line. Night had fallen outside, turning the lab's windows into black mirrors that reflected the sterile fluorescent lights. The clock on the wall read 10:47 p.m. They had been at it for hours, and the mood had shifted from hopeful to funereal. Ben had his coat on, ready to leave. One last test, Elara said, her voice strained. Let's sweep the radio frequencies, all of them. Ben sighed. Elara, that could take all night. Then it takes all night. She activated the lab's wide-spectrum frequency generator, starting at the lowest kilohertz bands and programming it to sweep slowly upwards. For hours, the only sound was the low hum of the machine and the quiet clicks as it shifted from one frequency range to the next. Ben had long since given up and was dozing in a chair. Elara watched the monitor, her eyes gritty with exhaustion as the numbers climbed. 500 megahertz, 800 megahertz, 1 gigahertz, nothing. She was about to surrender, to finally admit defeat, when the number on the generator display settled on a clean, sharp 1.42 gigahertz. The hydrogen line, the frequency astronomers scan for signs of extraterrestrial intelligence. On the monitor, the feed twitched. Elara shot forward in her chair, suddenly wide awake. Ben, the cells, previously motionless, were vibrating. Not a random thermal agitation, but a coherent, resonant hum. Ben was instantly by her side, sleep forgotten. What is that? An anomaly in the feed? No, Elara breathed, her fingers flying across the keyboard. Lock the frequency, narrow the beam, amplify by 10%. The hum from the generator intensified slightly. On the screen, the impossible happened. The crimson cells began to drift, pulling away from their random distribution. It was a slow, deliberate choreography, a silent ballet directed by an invisible force. They moved with a purpose that was utterly alien, aligning themselves into crude, geometric lines, forming the beginnings of a perfect, intricate grid. Ben stared, his mouth slightly agape, his skepticism dissolving into pure, unadulterated awe. He could not explain it. He could not rationalize it. He could only witness it. He leaned closer to the screen, his whisper barely audible in the silent, humming lab. They're listening. The word hung in the air, electric and impossible. Listening. For a moment, Elara and Ben could only stare at the monitor, at the silent, impossible choreography taking place in the petri dish. Awe quickly gave way to adrenaline. The next 72 hours became a blur of frantic, sleepless work. The lab, once a sterile and quiet space, was now the epicenter of their world, humming with the constant, focused tone of the 142 GHz signal. Coffee cups piled up next to discarded data printouts as they lived on caffeine, and the sheer, raw thrill of discovery. They learned the cells were more than just listeners. They were builders. By modulating the signal, embedding simple data patterns within the carrier wave, they could influence the construction. The initial, crude gridwork gave way to more complex structures. The screen showed what looked like microscopic circuits, with delicate filaments connecting larger nodes. Then, those circuits began to stack, forming three-dimensional scaffolding, an eerie, crystalline city growing in a drop of water. It was a process of creation unlike anything seen on Earth. "I want to know what they're building with," Ben said, his voice hoarse from exhaustion. His earlier skepticism had been replaced by a fierce, obsessive curiosity that now rivaled Elara's. With painstaking care, he used a micromanipulator to extract one of the newly formed filaments. It was infinitesimally small, barely visible to the naked eye, yet it was strong, resisting the delicate probe. He placed the filament into the mass spectrometer, a machine designed to identify the elemental and chemical signature of a substance. They waited, the silence of the lab punctuated only by the clicks and whirs of the machine processing the sample. Finally, the results appeared on Ben's monitor. He stared at the screen for a full minute, his face draining of all color. He swiveled his chair around slowly to face Elara. "That's not possible," he whispered. "What is it, Ben? What's the composition?" He looked at her, his eyes wide with a kind of scientific terror. "It's silica, silicon dioxide, with trace metallic elements." He swallowed hard. "They're not assembling proteins, Elara. Life, all life as we know it, builds with carbon. These things, they're building with glass. This isn't biology, it's nanotechnology, or something else entirely." The discovery was a paradigm shift. This wasn't just an unclassified organism. It was a form of matter that actively blurred the line between geology and life. It was impossible, and it was happening right in front of them. Triumphant, Elara worked in a feverish haze in her office. The doubt and isolation she had felt for years had been burned away, replaced by the white-hot certainty of her data. She was no longer a fringe theorist chasing shadows. She was at the forefront of the single greatest discovery in human history. Her fingers flew across the keyboard as she drafted a formal paper. She laid out their methodology, the discovery of the resonant frequency, and the subsequent controlled construction of complex structures. She embedded the stunning high-resolution images of the silica scaffolding, the patterns that looked so eerily like microcircuitry. The evidence was irrefutable. It was undeniable. It was beautiful. She attached the completed draft to a new email. The recipient, Professor Julian Croft. Her hands paused over the keyboard as she composed the message, choosing her words with care. "Julian, I know how this looks. I know the conclusions in the attached paper will seem extraordinary. 6 months ago, I would have agreed with you. But the data is undeniable. This is not algae. It is not terrestrial. It is a programmable silicon-based constructor. The implications are staggering, and frankly, they're bigger than both of us. This changes everything we thought we knew about the nature of life itself. I believe you need to see this before we go public. This is the evidence. Please, just look at the evidence. I'm your son, Elara. She read the email one last time, a knot of hopeful anticipation in her chest. He was a man of science. Faced with irrefutable proof, he would have to concede. He would have to see the truth. She took a deep breath and clicked send. The summons came the next morning, not as a reply to her email, but as a sterile, automated calendar invitation from the Dean of Sciences. Urgent meeting regarding research protocols. When Elara walked into the Dean's spacious, mahogany-paneled office, she found him sitting behind his enormous desk, looking deeply uncomfortable. Professor Croft was standing by the window, his back to her, staring out at the campus. He turned as the door clicked shut, and his expression was not one of scientific curiosity or collegial respect. It was cold, hard, and unforgiving. "Dr. Vance," the Dean began, fumbling with a pen. "Professor Croft has brought a deeply concerning matter to my attention." Croft stepped forward, placing a printout of her paper on the Dean's desk. Her beautiful, triumphant data, now reduced to a stack of incriminating evidence. "I received your manuscript," Croft said, his voice laced with a quiet, controlled fury that was far more terrifying than shouting. "I must admit, I am profoundly disappointed. I had thought you were a scientist." Elara felt a chill creep up her spine. "Julian, the data is all there. The spectrometry on the filaments, the microscope imagery. I am not here to debate your data." He cut her off, the word dripping with contempt. "I am here to address your reckless and sensationalist methodology. You have taken an inert biological sample, a closed case, and subjected it to an array of unregulated energy emissions, chasing a fantasy. You've abandoned the scientific method in favor of what can only be described as pseudoscience." "Pseudoscience? The structures are real. Ben and I built them. You can see them for yourself." "What I see," Croft said, his voice dropping, "is a researcher so desperate to validate a pet theory that she has thrown all professional integrity to the wind. You have violated a dozen research protocols, and you have drawn conclusions so far outside the bounds of established biology that they are frankly laughable." He turned to the Dean. "It is my professional opinion that Dr. Vance's work poses a threat to the credibility of this institution." The Dean cleared his throat, refusing to meet Elara's eyes. "Professor Croft has recommended, and I have agreed, that a formal review of all your current research grants is in order, pending an inquiry into your methods. Your tenure case, needless to say, is suspended." The words hit her like physical blows. She couldn't breathe. "Furthermore," Croft added, delivering the final devastating strike, "given the questionable nature of your current experiments, your access to the Level 3 microbiology lab and all associated equipment is hereby revoked, effective immediately." He wasn't saving her. He wasn't correcting her. He was burying her. He was taking her discovery, her life's work, and locking it in a box, shutting off the power, and pretending it never existed. She stood there, silenced and condemned, realizing that she hadn't just discovered something new. She had committed heresy, and the Church of Science was about to burn the witch. The fluorescent hum of the university lab was a ghost in Elara's memory. Her new world smelled of motor oil, damp concrete, and the sharp metallic scent of ozone from an overloaded power strip. Ben's garage was less a laboratory and more a refugee camp for scientific equipment. A high-resolution digital microscope sat incongruously on a workbench next to a rusty toolbox. A spectrum analyzer and a frequency generator, the two most crucial pieces of equipment they'd managed to check out before her access was revoked, were wired into a web of extension cords snaking across the floor. Elara sat on a wobbly stool, staring at the single, precious petri dish containing the last of the sample. It was illuminated by a cheap desk lamp, a pathetic substitute for the lab's perfectly calibrated lighting. She looked defeated, hollowed out. They hadn't just taken her lab, they had taken her name, her credibility, her future. Ben, however, was a live wire of defiant energy. He slammed a portable cooling unit down next to the frequency generator, his movements sharp and angry. "Okay, the thermal regulators are online," he announced, wiping grease from his hands with a rag. He looked at Elara's slumped posture, and his expression softened for a moment before hardening again. "They think they buried us," he said, his voice low and intense. "They think they can just delete the data, lock the door, and pretend none of this ever happened." "They can, Ben," Elara said, her voice barely a whisper. "They did. We have nothing. No proof, no access, no credibility." "We have this," he said, pointing to the petri dish. "We have the signal. We have the truth. That's more than they have." He leaned over the workbench, his eyes boring into hers. "Forget them. Forget Croft and the Dean and all the other cowards who are too afraid to see what's right in front of them. Let's give them something they can't bury." For the first time since she'd walked out of the Dean's office, a flicker of the old fire returned to Elara's eyes. He was right. They weren't just scientists anymore. They were heretics. And they had work to do. They pushed the experiment into uncharted territory. Before, they had been cautious, using simple, clean signals. Now, with nothing left to lose, they were aggressive. They began modulating the 1.42 GHz carrier wave, embedding it with more complex data streams. They started with simple things: sequences of prime numbers, the value of pi, the Fibonacci sequence, mathematical concepts they hoped might represent a universal language. The cells responded. The growth of the silica structures accelerated dramatically. The intricate lattice, which had taken days to form in the lab, now rebuilt and expanded itself in a matter of hours. It was a shimmering, three-dimensional web of impossible intricacy, a ghostly testament to an intelligence they could not comprehend. But the accelerated growth came at a cost. The frequency generator, pushed to its limits, drew a massive amount of power. The single bare light bulb hanging from the garage ceiling began to flicker and dim, casting long, dancing shadows. The hum from the overloaded circuits grew louder, a constant ominous drone. Each new pulse of data they sent into the dish caused the lights to dip precariously, threatening to plunge them into darkness. They were in a race, pushing their renegade experiment as hard as they could before the power gave out, or worse, before the erratic energy consumption drew unwanted attention. The garage, their last sanctuary, now felt like a ticking time bomb. It was late, the world outside silent, the only light coming from their array of monitors. Elara was running a high-powered digital imaging scan, mapping the lattice in 3 dimensions. She was tracing a recurring pattern, a nexus point where multiple filaments converged in a precise, non-random way. As the software rendered the 3D model, she zoomed out, rotating the image. And then she saw it. It wasn't a circuit, it wasn't just abstract geometry, it was a map. "Ben," she breathed, her voice trembling. "Get over here, now." Ben rushed to her side, and together they stared at the screen. The nexus points weren't random. They corresponded to the relative positions of stars. The delicate filaments connecting them traced the familiar shapes of constellations. That's Orion," Ben stammered, pointing. "And there's Cassiopeia." "They're a reference," Elara said, her mind racing. A key. She followed the most prominent filament pathway across the map to a dense, unfamiliar cluster of points. "It's pointing to something." She cross-referenced the cluster with an open-source astronomy database on her laptop. The software churned for a moment, and then an image resolved on the screen. It was a section of the night sky, dominated by a familiar celestial swan. "Cygnus," Elara whispered. The map was pointing to a specific, unremarkable yellow dwarf star within the constellation. She frantically searched the database. There are no documented exoplanets around this star. Nothing. It's a blank spot in the catalogue. As the words left her mouth, a low hum began to emanate from the frequency generator. The light bulb in the ceiling flickered violently and then went dark, plunging them into the glow of the monitors. The silica structure in the petri dish, their beautiful, impossible map, began to glow with a soft, internal orange light. "What's happening?" Ben yelled over the rising hum. I think it knows we solved it," Elara said, her eyes locked on the glowing dish. The hum escalated into a high-pitched whine. The orange light pulsed once, brilliantly, and then with a sharp crack of displaced energy, the petri dish shattered. The sound echoed in the sudden, deafening silence. They stared in horror. The intricate, glowing lattice was gone. In its place, at the center of the shattered glass, was nothing but a tiny pile of fine, inert, crimson dust. The map was gone. The message was gone. Their only sample, their only proof, had vanished in a flash of light. Dawn cast a pale, grey light into the garage, revealing a scene of utter desolation. Elara sat on the concrete floor amidst the shards of shattered glass, the fine red dust scattered like dried blood. The silence was absolute. There was no hum of machinery, no glow from the monitor, nothing left to analyze. It was over, all of it. Ben was asleep in a chair, exhausted and defeated, but Elara couldn't rest. Her mind, with nothing new to process, had turned inward, obsessively retracing every step, every piece of data. She picked up the sheaf of Dr. Joshi's papers, the only real evidence she had left. She read through them again and again, the familiar words a meaningless mantra. Then her eyes caught something she had dismissed a dozen times before, a geological addendum, dry and academic, stapled to the back of the main report. It detailed the mineral content of the soil in the areas where the red rain had been most heavily concentrated in 2001. On a desperate whim, she opened her laptop, pulled up a topographical map of the Kerala region, and began cross-referencing the locations from the addendum. A pattern emerged, a faint, almost imperceptible correlation. The highest concentrations of the red cells, the locations where Joshi had reported the most intense radio frequency spikes. They weren't random. "That's it," she whispered, her voice a dry rasp. The sound woke Ben. "What is it?" he mumbled, rubbing his eyes. "It wasn't random," she said, her eyes wide, a frantic energy returning to her. She turned the laptop towards him. "Look, all the hotspots, they correspond to the locations of ancient temples, pre-Christian era." Ben squinted at the screen, then started typing, pulling up satellite images and archaeological records. "Okay, I see the temples. So what? What are they built from, Ben? What's the local geology?" He ran the query, his fingers flying across the keys. A moment later, he leaned back, his face a mask of dawning comprehension. "Oh my God, they're all built from granite, heavy granite foundations." He looked at Elara. Granite rich in quartz, the pieces of the puzzle, scattered across disciplines and centuries, slammed into place. It wasn't just biology, it wasn't just radio astronomy. It was history, geology, and something else entirely, all woven together. "The quartz," Elara said, standing up, the exhaustion gone, replaced by a terrifying clarity. "It's a natural piezoelectric crystal. It resonates, it amplifies radio signals." She began to pace the cramped garage, thinking aloud, the entire theory pouring out of her. "We had it all backwards. We thought we were sending a message, trying to get the cells to talk to us. But they weren't trying to send anything. They were building something." "The star map," Ben said. "No," Elara corrected. "Not the map. The map was just a byproduct, a schematic. The structure itself, it was a receiver, a biosilica antenna tuned to a specific frequency. And the quartz in the ground, in the foundations of those ancient temples, it wasn't a coincidence. It was a catalyst, a natural amplifier for a signal they were waiting to receive." As she spoke, a news alert popped up on the screen of a tablet lying on the workbench. The headline read, "Once in a century Draconid meteor shower to peak tonight. promising dazzling global spectacle. The signal, at that exact moment, the garage's roll-up door was forced open, with a deafening screech of metal. Two uniformed university security guards stepped inside, flanking a triumphant Professor Croft. He surveyed the chaotic, makeshift lab with a look of undisguised contempt. "It's over, Elara," he announced, his voice cold and final. "Your little stunt with the power grid didn't go unnoticed. We tracked the energy spikes right to this address. It's time to end this fantasy." The climax of their story, the moment of ultimate understanding, was to be a squalid little scene of academic discipline. Croft saw a disgraced researcher in a garage. Elara saw a man standing on the edge of a cliff, completely unaware of the abyss below. Croft's men began to move forward, their instructions clear: seize everything. Elara didn't move to stop them. She didn't argue or plead. She simply raised a trembling hand and pointed through the open doorway to the darkening evening sky. "You're too late," she said. A single brilliant streak of light tore across the twilight. The meteor shower had begun. Croft scoffed. "Oh, please, don't be so melodramatic. You are not Galileo, and this is not the Inquisition." Then his phone buzzed. A sharp, insistent vibration. He pulled it from his pocket, his brow furrowing. At the same time, Ben's phone buzzed, then the phones of the two security guards. On every screen, the same stark message: a global emergency alert, unspecified atmospheric event. The garage lights, already strained, flickered violently and died. The hum of their equipment fell silent. In the sudden darkness, a television in the corner of the garage, previously off, flickered to life on its own battery power. A frantic news anchor was speaking, her voice strained with panic, repeating, "This is not a localized event. We are getting reports from London, Tokyo, Cairo, Moscow, an unprecedented meteorological phenomenon. A rainfall, red in color, is being reported in cities across the globe." Croft stared at the television screen, his smug certainty utterly shattering, his face illuminated by the horrifying images of a red-streaked sky over Paris. Everything he knew, everything he had built his life and reputation on, was dissolving in real time. He looked at Elara, but she wasn't looking at him. Her gaze was fixed on the sky outside, now laced with the fiery trails of the meteor shower. An expression of profound, soul-shattering terror was etched on her face. She had been right. She had proven her theory. She had won, and in doing so, she had just borne witness to the activation signal for a silent planetary invasion that had been waiting patiently for millennia. The signal had been received. The terraforming had begun. There's a fascinating tension at the heart of this story that goes beyond a simple science versus the unknown narrative. It's really a story about the culture of science itself. On one hand, you have Professor Croft, who represents the establishment. For him, science is a fortress of known facts, and his job is to protect its walls from anything that might threaten them. The official explanation for the red rain is neat, tidy, and most importantly, it doesn't challenge the existing paradigm. It's a safe answer. On the other hand, you have Dr. Vance. She embodies the true spirit of the scientific method, which isn't about defending old knowledge, but about relentlessly pursuing anomalies, the things that don't fit. She follows the data, even when it leads her away from the accepted truth, away from her career and into a makeshift lab in a garage. The story's brilliant twist is that her rigorous, evidence-based approach leads her to a conclusion that sounds like something out of ancient superstition, an event triggered by the heavens. She uses the tools of reason to arrive at an unreasonable truth. It suggests that sometimes the truly groundbreaking discoveries aren't found in the center of our knowledge, but out on the fringes, where the rules begin to break down. It makes you wonder about the nature of proof itself. So, here's my question for you. At what point does a scientific anomaly become so strange that it requires a leap of faith to keep investigating. Let me know your thoughts in the comments.